Malcolm Gladwell is a man of many talents, writer, podcaster, and all-around big thinker. But for our Kelefa Sanneh, Malcolm Gladwell is a colleague, and they run into the most interesting people.
I think maybe the last time I saw you, we were both on the set of the Jim Gaffigan show.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Jim. How late's your interview?
Oh, thanks. You're a giant.
It's been 5 years since Malcolm Gladwell and I have been in the same room.
What books have you been reading, Jim?
Don't you know how to read?
We were acting.
Playing ourselves,
Yes.
playing New Yorker writers in a scene on that show.
Crush him.
I'm sorry.
Crush him.
But that's just his day job.
You have a lot of titles: magazine writer, best-selling author, media mogul. The one that's most impressive to me, if I'm being honest, hit country music songwriter.
Wait, I wrote a country music song?
You did. It's called 10,000 Hours.
Oh.
Let's spend 10,000 hours and 10,000 more.
By Dan and Shay, featuring Justin Bieber. It went to #1 on the country chart.
Okay, technically Gladwell didn't write it, but the song was inspired by his observation in his third book, Outliers, that it takes 10,000 hours to master something difficult.
There's this notion we have that you can burst out of the gate and be fantastic at something complicated at a very young age is just not true.
What was it like for you to watch this concept of 10,000 hours, break free from the chains of this best-selling book you'd written, and just be everywhere?
It's always fun to see your ideas out in the world, even if they're not in the form that you would necessarily intend. But that's the goal, right? When you write a book, is you want your book to be talked about.
His talked about and best-selling books have made Gladwell an industry and an international phenomenon who can make up to $250,000 for giving a speech.
Well, I have infamously said, I would rather be interesting than correct. And I think that's right. Judgments about correctness are made after the fact. So a writer who is concerned with always being right would never write. So I think a writer's job is to be interesting. That is to say, to raise questions that need raising, to give people the tools to think through difficult subjects.
He also thinks through some of those difficult and not so difficult subjects on his top-rated podcast, Revisionist History.
This episode is a continuation of my investigation into the hoarding habits of art museums,
which is beginning its 6th season this week.
Revisionist history treats ideas as things that are worthy of our time, our effort, our consideration. Good ideas to me are like beloved friends. You want to hang out with them. You want to have conversations with them. You want to argue with them. You want to go for walks with them. I think we need more of that in the world.
Now he's rethinking the audiobook.
The audiobook historically was an afterthought.
Right.
You just read your book into a microphone. But our thought was, that seems crazy.
His latest, The Bomber Mafia, is produced by his own audio production company, Pushkin Industries.
There's so much more possibility in audio. Let's use sound effects. Let's have musical scoring. Let's make it an experience.
Chapter 8. The first superfortress reached Tokyo just after midnight, dropping flares to mark the target area.
The Bomber Mafia explores the firebombing of Tokyo, which led to the end of World War II.
I went to this little museum that commemorates the night of March 9th, 1945, when the U.S. Air Force napalmed Tokyo, burned 16 square miles of Tokyo down in a matter of hours. And I was just so moved by this museum that I wanted to know, how did the United States come to the point where they dropped tons and tons of napalm and burned tens of thousands of people alive?
He learned about an effort beginning in 1930 to prevent wartime mass killings and destruction.
The story is about this group of people who think they can reinvent war. They can use technology for the first time in history to drop a bomb with precision.
It could be a little more surgical, a little more precise.
Yes, exactly. But the Bomber Mafia weren't just interested in being better bombers. They were interested in being better people. Because they said, look, if I can drop bombs with unerring accuracy, I don't have to bomb civilians anymore. And that was their dream.
The military spent billions in today's dollars building a precision bombing machine.
Now the Bombardiers moment. The entire massive operations high point nears its climax.
And there's only one problem with this device, right?
Doesn't work.
The Air Force gave up on precision bombing in favor of brute force.
So there is this idea that war can be more humane. This idea fails. The Air Force decides to basically just set Japan on fire instead. What's the moral of this story?
I don't think that this book is about deciding who was right. I want people to appreciate the impossibility of the choice.
Well, why now?
Well, because we're pretty quick off the mark these days to judge others whose situations we don't entirely understand. I thought it'd be really useful to force people not to do that.
Force people not to make quick judgments? That may surprise anyone who remembers his 2005 bestseller, Blink, The Power of Thinking Without Thinking.
Is it wrong of me to perceive in this a kind of an anti-Blink approach? You're the guy who wrote The Power of Thinking Without Thinking.
Well, no, wait a minute. Blink was a book that was intended to showcase the power of snap judgments for both good and ill, right? Blink argued there are certain times and places where your snap judgment is useful, but it's probably a pretty short list. What they didn't understand was that the very thing that was the source of his apparent strength was also the source of his greatest weakness.
He says he's comfortable with what he calls thinking in public.
There's a group of people now who I think understand what I'm doing, who are my audience. They like the experience of thinking along with me in public.
Are you cancel-proof?
Well, no. I'm not immune from people being angry with things I say or write and wanting me to go away, but that's been true for a long time.
Malcolm Gladwell has gone from magazines to books to podcasts. For him, the best way to stay interesting is to stay a moving target.
Do you still think of yourself as someone who wants to sort of shift phases every decade or so?
Well, I'm running out of shifts.
I'm not sure you are running out of shifts.
I'll do this for a while, but I do love the feeling, that feeling of reinvention is a very important one. And that idea that you're waking up to do something that's new.